And we're back. Welcome back to another session of Red Birth Green After Dark. I am Erica Goodhouse, founder of Birth Reclamation at Rooted and director over at Red Birth Green. I've got the lovely Rowan Jacobo with me again this evening. And we are going to be talking about some heavy stuff tonight, as if we don't do that usually. But generally speaking, it's maybe, I don't know, it's all educational. I was going to try and make it a little more gentle. It just isn't. So please consider, this is. Tonight's topic is deplorable and just so gruesome. That's a good word for it. And so consider this your content warning that we want you to be really kind and gentle with yourself. And so we are going to be talking about things like obstetric violence and medical apartheid and things that are really heavy. And if that feels like too much in the midst of a week where the world is kind of too much, we completely understand. And we'll see you next time. And that's okay. We would definitely invite you, if you're going to tune out for tonight, to head over to our social media at Red Birth Green on Instagram, or check out at Rooted on Instagram or on Facebook. We're doing a fundraiser this week in collaboration with Black Maternal Health Week, which is a national initiative. There's more information that you can find everywhere if you do a little bit of searching. Obviously, our work is always focused on Black mamas and brown mamas in the community. And so this was just a really great chance for us to lean in and extend an opportunity to partner with all of you. But again, check us out. And if this is too much, we'll see you next time. And there's no hard feelings about that. So all of that said, let's get into it. So we're here always on Thursday nights at 8:30. This week, we are specifically here because it is Black Maternal Health Week, and we're starting to round that out. It kicked off on Sunday. There's been lots of great conversations happening. Shout out to Kamala Harris, who was did this really beautiful address and hosted a kind of roundtable discussion talking about all things related to Black maternal health and the disparities that Black parents face. Particularly Black women. I know we are always working hard. We just spent an entire month talking to you about expanding your vocabulary. But the reality is that so much of our work is rooted in that of Black female bodies and what they experience within our medical system, which I refer to as the medical industrial complex, if you've ever heard me talk about this before, because that's what it is. It is an industrial complex, just like any other industry, and it's not necessarily people first. We are in the business of people and babies and bodies, and that is always at the center of what we bring to the table. So I think it's just really important to recognize exactly what Black women are up against when they decide that they are going to bring life into this world. So much so, in fact, I'm going to share a quote with you that I came across earlier today. Again, thanks to Black Maternal Health Week and another account in Michigan that was sharing. And it says, if being a pregnant Black woman were an occupation in America, it would be the 5th deadliest job in the country. I'll let that sit for a second, because that's intense and it shouldn't be the case. For a Black woman, becoming pregnant in the 21st century is more dangerous than being a steel worker or working on a construction site. And how is that possible? And it's only for Black women. These statistics are not related to their white counterparts, not now, not ever. I will say, as a community, Kalamazoo has made tremendous strides through the work of partnerships and different organizations who want to see things better. In the early, in the mid 2010s, in 2000 to 2010, we were seeing rates that were 7 times the rates of white counterparts. We're down now to about 2.5 to 3. We love that, right? We want nothing more than to work ourselves out of a job, right? That is always why we are here. And yet we know that we have a lot of work to do. So I think it's important, and this is why we're having this really heavy conversation tonight and having it during Black Maternal Health Week, to know where we came from and how we got here, right? Because when people hear these huge disparities, they're like, but how? How is this a thing, and why did it happen? So we're going to talk about some of that. We're going to talk about the history, because we cannot actually move forward if we don't know where we've been. We risk repeating history, and goodness knows that we do not want to do that in this case, because lives are at stake. We have a really cool project we're bringing to the community in the fall that is hopefully going to take away those disparities completely, at least for the people who are able to be a part of it. I'm thrilled about that. I'm like this close to being able to actually like talk about it. We cannot wait for that. So keep coming back so you can be one of the first people to know when we can really like take the tape off of that one. I'm very excited. But we still have a lot of work to do. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Rowan. We're going to talk a bit about the history of obstetrics and gynecology in this country. Brace yourselves. If you have no base for this, like it's heavy stuff. And it's, again, we will not take offense if you're like, "Ooh, I gotta go." That's okay.
That's practicing self-care.
It is practicing self-care. And again, in the midst of a really heavy week of lifting within Black communities across the country, but especially in Minnesota, like it's okay to say that this week is too much. That's okay. So, Rowan, go ahead, dip your toes in.
Yeah. So I'll start off just by saying that this is, like Erica said, the history of gynecology in the United States. And it's not even history that people training in gynecology and or obstetrics receive. They just don't. And like many of us know that capitalism and the entirety of America were built on Black bodies. The same is true for obstetrics, and that's because it is part of the medical industrial complex, and so the purpose of it is to advance capital. And when research was first being done into gynecology and obstetrics, it was done on Black women because their bodies were disposable on enslaved Black women. So I'm going to read this quote from a book called Medical Bondage by Deirdre Owens to give an idea of the situation here, and then we can get into it. So the first women's hospital in the United States was housed on a small slave farm in Mount Meigs, Alabama, a lumber town about 15 miles from Montgomery, a large slave trading center. From 1844 to 1849, Anarcha, Betsy, Lucy, and about 9 other unidentified enslaved women and girls lived and worked together in the slave hospital that Dr. James Marion Sims founded for his training and for the surgical repair of his patients. He had his workers, probably enslaved, build the hospital for the treatment of enslaved women affected by vesicovaginal fistulae, a common obstetrical condition that caused incontinence. And that was brought on by trauma and by the vaginal and anal tearing women suffered in childbirth. Years after he performed his pioneering work, all experimental, Sims achieved success and an international good reputation, which I will interject that he did not have before. He would later be known as the father of American gynecology, and still is. So basically, he was not the only doctor and slave owner to function this way and to gain knowledge and clout by experimenting on enslaved women. So the way that this worked is that white doctors would purchase Black women with reproductive issues, abnormalities, tendencies that interested them. They would use their bodies for reproductive experiments that mostly entailed healing whatever issues were presented, like the vesicovaginal fistulae in that quote. And they would also train the women that they were enslaving to be their surgical assistants. So they were simultaneously his patients, his assistants, and these women were also still performing all of the duties that enslaved people were expected to perform on plantations. So
can we pause there for a second?
Yeah, definitely, because that was already so much.
It's so very much that they were receiving trauma, assisting in causing trauma to their sisters that they're doing life with, and still forced and required by law to go about their daily duties as if those things weren't happening. Like, this is why post-traumatic slave syndrome is a thing generationally, and why we still feel these things. We may not even have words for them, but we may witness something or hear something or experience something and like have this visceral response and be like, where did that come from? That right there. That's where it came from, because it's in our DNA. And just as a categorical experience, by way of, how we were brought into this world. So, okay. I just had to I
Definitely.
just need to give a moment to digest that, because it is just beyond, it's just unfathomable, I guess, to me.
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's reproductive energy is extra energy, right? And so when people are chronically stressed, that reproductive energy can usually dwindle because they don't have all that extra energy. And so, of course, these people were 100% stressed 100% all the time because their lives were always at stake. And that carries through. That also carries through into the body, into creating these disorders that were being looked at in these hospitals. So there's also got to be like a logic behind this, right? A scientific reason that they were allowed to do these experiments on Black women and not white women. And what that was that Black women were considered biologically and mentally inferior to white women. And at the same time, it was only through experimentation on their pregnant and postpartum bodies that Sims was able, and all of these doctors were able, to bring their work to white women and create foundations of American gynecology and obstetrics, right? So white women are these fragile flowers, and Black women are not people, and yet they have this like brute force that makes it so that they don't feel pain. And that was literally the whole idea behind it. And it hasn't changed.
It genuinely hasn't changed. Like the idea of protect white women at all costs, right? Because they can't handle anything. And yet Black women can't feel anything, so it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
This is why we have such strong advocacy roles in when we're supporting birth. Because so often, still right now, 2021, yesterday, today, tomorrow, this is happening as women are birthing babies, that their pain, their worries, their concerns, they're completely dismissed because you can suck it up.
And not even to mention consent.
Right. Yeah. That's like a whole, that's a whole talk. That's a whole Thursday night. Talking about just the consent piece, and consent and what that actually means. But really just taking pause to recognize, like I experienced this last year in the hospital myself. Like, oh my gosh, you must be amazing because, but my heart rate is showing you that I'm actually not okay, right? My heart rate is showing you that my body is experiencing pain, and you're like, oh, well, I guess we could get you something for that. And I'm like somebody who advocates all the time and like knows how to do that, right? But when you're in distress, like, why should you have to actually fight for basic things? It's because the place is not the same. It just isn't. So, just a little introduction. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah. So, okay, let's see. So all of that being said, and that was a lot.
Yes,
that was a lot. And this guy, Sims, obviously, like I said, is not the only doctor to advance his career by performing these experiments and then taking credit, right? And so the only way that was possible was by him using Black midwives, enslaved Black midwives, to teach him what he knew. And then also to ignore a good chunk of what they said, a good majority of what they said, and do his own thing. And this is one of the many ways that Black women's knowledge of folk medicine, herbal medicine, midwifery were just co-opted. They were just taken. right? So these women frequently provided the vast majority of birth support, and it was actually only allowed for Black midwives to deliver Black babies, and yet these doctors were then there to finish the job, right? And then take all the credit for the work and put it in all their medical journals, lying through their teeth about how things happened, and glean a huge amount of information that they could continue to co-opt in their practices, right? So these historical records list the New York Hospital that Sims founded in 1855 as the country's first women's hospital, but doesn't recognize that 10 years prior to that, he had created an Alabama slave hospital for women where he learned everything that he then carried through to these fragile, gentle white women that needed to be protected, right? So there's a lot more. There's a lot more to the history. There's a lot, I can get a lot more specific. I mean, a lot of the information that I'm bringing here is from a book that I've been listening to that's hours long, right? And if you want if you want to learn more about the specifics, and I especially encourage white birth workers, white women, white people to do that research because it's important to know. But that's really just the situation of it, what I just outlined. That's really where gynecology comes from. That's the reason that we understand the anatomy and physiology, is because those organs were removed after women died. And autopsies were frequent and abundant to figure out what was going on in these people's bodies. So,
and generally speaking, only the bodies of Black women.
oh, yes.
So, so that's that in like the tiniest nutshell possible, so that we don't get like shadow banned on the internet, like we're getting, too far into it. But I think it's also important to really like talk about the legacy and the work of the Black midwives who were providing this education. Knowing the Black midwives that I know, they'd have given it anyways, like, because it's who they are as people. It's a calling on a really deep spiritual level, and it's really beautiful. So they would have provided it regardless. The fact that it was kind of forced and then co-opted is like, that's the real issue. But in communities in the early 1900s, 90% of babies were being born at home, Black or otherwise. Like that's just what birth was. It wasn't happening in the hospital, right? So the fact that this hospital then was created, like essentially a women's health hospital, that was taken from this information that was gleaned from the work of Black women, and then actually taken a step farther and used against them. So let me lead you on the path to that point. So in the early 1900s, like I said, 90% of babies were being born at home, being born within their own communities, generally speaking, into the hands of a midwife. In the South in particular, because kind of the history of Black midwifery, they were being born into the hands of Black women all the time. They, generally speaking, the Black and brown women in communities were required to go to a community clinic and see a white obstetrician and a white nurse for clinical care, and then sent back for their babies to actually be delivered by those Black midwives. Again, you see this like power imbalance, right? A little bit of a shift, like, oh, only we can do this part, but you can do all of the rest, all of the heavy lifting. Actually going to the home, being on call, catching the actual baby, tending to hemorrhages, postpartum care, nutrition, education, on and on, right? And so at some point about mid-1900s, so like 50s-ish, late 40s, 50s-ish, there started to be a shift. And this is where that information that was received and taught so freely was it started to be turned against Black midwives. Their cleanliness was called into question. Their knowledge, their abilities were called into question. They were charged with being reckless. They were arrested. They were, held in contempt, like for the work that they had been doing for decades and upon decade before that. And so then the shift from the early 1900s, where it was 90-10, flipped completely the opposite direction to be at 90% in hospital and 10% out of. And that's basically where we've remained ever since then. And that power imbalance has remained ever since then. And also, there's been a really strong erasure, especially in northern states, of the history and foundation that got us to where we are now. People don't know the names of those midwives that were catching babies in the 1800s, the early 1900s, the ones that took us through the mid-century, before that power was taken away from them. They don't know the names of the Black midwives who are practicing now. They don't, and that to me is, I don't even know, like, I don't have a feeling really about, I'm just like, I don't know how it's possible. I'm immersed in it every day. Like we have conversations with these people on a regular basis. We're in a position right now to partner with some of them on a regular basis, to provide education and to further the reach. But to not have the names like Shafia Monroe and Afu Hassan, who we just lost from the community, and Jenny Joseph, who is still incredibly active in Florida, like to not have to enter into conversation regularly with white people, who have no idea, but they know who Ina May Gaskin is, right? Like Ina May came ages after, and this is no shade towards her because she had her own thing going, right? She developed her own systems and, the farm as a method of care and like all of the things that went into that. Like it was also about like pushing against the system, right? And not giving in to the status quo. And again, really like this extreme form of feminism that we saw rise up in the 70s to like take back the power to women. It's the same, but there's never a nod to everything that came before, right? And I think like that's where my issue is, and there's a lot of tension in that for me. And so I feel like it's always so important for us to have these conversations about know the history and know the people, know the players, know what was happening and what went down, because it's not really recorded well in history books, but it is recorded. You just have to dig. There are stacks upon stacks of papers, journal articles, like things that would blow your mind. If you want things, please reach out to us. Like we can give you links to access. A lot of them are behind paywalls, unfortunately, because medical journals are just like that. But it definitely exists. And it's there for the taking. And I feel like we need more people invested in that conversation to make sure that it never disappears.
Right.
Because otherwise that responsibility, again, the weight of the heavy lifting falls on the shoulders of Black women. And we want to alleviate some of that, right? We want to really enter into more of a partnership, and be able to say, how can we help and further and grow and encourage? So, again, it's another section of just a lot. Like that was a huge gloss over of a very long and intricate time period. So yes. So where do we go from here, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. Well, Ashley asked what percentage of babies are born at home today. Do you have a number off the top of your head? Because I Googled something.
Oh, did you? Awesome. So I think that we're getting to a place of about 15%.
Okay.
But it could be less than that still.
In 2012, it was 0.89%.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I could be way off base. Again,
that's in 2012. So like who knows, but that grew from 0.56 in 2004.
Which is just blowing to me. I also think it's important to think about and to talk about how that choice or making alternative choices for your pregnancy and for your birth, right, is really weaponized against birthing bodies of any color. And again, all it's doing is going back to our roots. All of us, Black, brown, white, purple, people were born at home into the hands of trusted individuals
Because this knowledge was carried by everyone, especially those with birthing bodies.
Yes,
It was
absolutely.
a necessity.
Yes. And it was like, there was like the trusting and the intuition. So even if you didn't have formal training, usually somebody in your family like did, and
Yeah.
or was just the person that like everybody called when it was time to have their baby. And so it's like, oh yeah, my auntie's sister is that. My mom is that. My grandma was that. Like that was so common, and we just don't have that. Honestly, even just the path to be that person now is prohibitive for so many people. And for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is legal ramifications, because there, is usually a hunt for people who are making alternative choices for their bodies and for the bodies of other people. That to me is just really challenging. It's really hard, I think, for people to make the choice to say, I want to be a provider that cares for people in this way. But I also have a family, and I can't go to jail if something goes wrong, even if I wasn't actually at fault, right? That's real and that's valid. I know there was a survey circulating not too long ago asking Black women that exact question, because Black midwives are literally a dying breed. And I say that because we have lost 2 of the legacy midwives in the last month, very close together. That's detrimental to the future of this work. And it, in some ways, it is a little frightening to think like, how do we move past that? Yeah. I don't know. This is just always where I kind of sit and pot. Like you guys know, it's not often that I'm kind of at a loss for words, but really this is like one of those times where I'm just like, I'm not sure what else to say. Like, it's just, again, it's why it's so important for us to be doing the work that we do in the community, to come alongside and do this work within trusted relationships with families. And that we can further our reach doing it in birth support, as opposed to being that primary care provider, which is why we choose that route versus, taking the further educational step of, offering midwifery services right now, because it's hard. We want to make sure that as many people have access as possible, and also recognizing that it's like birthing at home now, because so much knowledge has been lost, and what we see and what is normalized is like stepping within the system, and very medicalized birth, that birthing at home is not for everybody. And they don't know how to trust that, because we've lost the ability to trust ourselves, trust our bodies, trust our babies, that our babies will let us know that things are happening. Right.
And like childbirth education is not like an integral part of the community.
Correct. So, right. Yes. And so, again, that's why we offer that. We offer for families to be able to come to us and just say, like, this is really what I want to know. I don't want to sit in a class with people that don't look like me, don't have experiences like me. And that's so fair, right? Like, there's not an option that exists like that. Post-COVID, we really hope to be able to offer group sessions that are specifically for BIPOC families to come to, so that we can talk about the issues that they face that other people don't. It's just really, really important to be able to be transparent in that brave space and say, like, I'm scared. I'm scared to have a baby. Yeah, honestly, we all should be.
Totally.
Yeah, it's that fear is real and it's founded. I want to make sure that that's always very clear. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking like the one thing that came into my mind is just like the accessibility of home birth, and the reasons that people choose home birth, some of them being specific to wanting what a home birth has to offer, and then the other being to avoid the industrial medical complex.
That part.
Right. And so, yes. And like, in order to choose that and be safe to choose that, whiteness is really your friend, because if you choose a home birth and there are complications and you have to go to the hospital, you're going to be accepted and maybe chastised a little bit for choosing home birth in the first place. But if you choose home birth and you're a Black woman and there are complications and you have to go to the hospital, like, you chose something that, number one, the hospital doesn't like more often than not. And number two, your body that they don't care for.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing too is that it's like, even that is not a guarantee. Like, there's no guarantee for a Black body that going to the hospital that you're going to come out alive. That's just the truth.
Right.
It's like, it's the harshest thing, and I hate having to say it that way, but it's just the truth, and I don't want to like tiptoe around that fact. I mean, a Black mom at an Indiana hospital just died again. Like, this happened with a doctor who was a patient and had a baby and didn't come home from that experience. Like, this is just a regular occurrence. Like, again, like the quote that I shared, like, this is the fifth deadliest. If this were a job, it'd be the fifth deadliest job in the country.
Right.
We will not stop working at this until that's not the case. I don't want it to be news, right? I don't want it to be shocking, and I don't want it to be so painful. I want it to be and get us to a place where like it's just regular. Like, you can actually come back to a place of experiencing Black joy because you're pregnant and you're growing a new life. Right? There's nothing overshadowing that fact, and you can just experience it.
Yeah.
We have a long ways to go before that's the case. And so, again, like, if you've ever heard Kama and I talk about this, our ultimate goal is to work ourselves out of a job, right? It's in the description for tonight. Can we do that? My hope is yes. Will it happen in my lifetime? I don't know. Again, that's why having the conversations we had for this last month about expanding our vocabulary, showing up for our kids differently, which that steps back into February when we first started these conversations, about decolonizing everything, decolonizing parenting, changing our way of being, I think is our pathway forward. That is our best shot at working ourselves out of this job and not needing any services from Red Birth Green, and just being able to go on and live life like any other person. But it's going to take a long time. It's legacy work. It's why we have to keep teaching our kids different, teaching them how to ask different questions and do so with power and tact and strength. And, it's why we have to just keep showing up here every week too, to talk about things.
Having hard conversations.
Yes, having the hard conversations. And because, you don't know what you don't know. And, we want to make sure that we're able to provide that in some way, shape, or form. So, lay sigh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Rowan, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on tonight? I know, like, it's just so much. It's just so much.
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing that, like, when I was thinking about having this conversation, like, all day and, all week thinking about this, the only reason that this is the history is because slavery needed to be perpetuated and capitalism needed to be perpetuated. And those things haven't changed. They have shifted and they look different now, but it's the same thing. And so, like, working ourselves out of a job, like, that sentence all by itself is such a huge concept. Like, what does that look like, to work ourselves out of a job? That looks like having intact communities where this kind of support is built into life, right? You don't have to search for it. You have to buy it. And you don't have to worry whether or not you can get it because it's your inherent right as a human being, right?
Right. It's reclaiming the village, right?
Yeah.
That's how we show up. Reclaiming the village. It's why my title for Rooted is the Conjurer of Birth Reclamation, right? And it's why our birth worker training course is Reclaiming Birth, because we're reclaiming that which was taken to us, rerouting it in our community, and making it just be so. It just is, right? It seems so simple, and yet
there's so much work to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Individual, collective, systemic.
All of it. Yes, especially the systemic piece. We'll keep chipping away at the systemic piece while also creating systems that are a different way of movement and being. Because I think at this point, that's what it's going to take to actually move us forward into a place of sustainability and change.
Regeneration.
Yes, to really impact and have that make a true generational shift. I think we're starting to reach a point, if we're not already fully there, where the only way out, it's no longer like through. The only way out is to like sidestep and like start fresh with a different mode of being.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yes, which is probably a great call to action to say it's why we need people to partner with us.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing a fundraiser in combination with Black Maternal Health Week. Because doing these things and creating ways of being, it takes dollars in order to do that. And you as a community are incredibly generous to Rooted and Red Birth Green as an extension and division of that. And so this is a great way for you to show up for birthing families in our community right now. And so we'll make sure that we drop that link to the fundraiser in the chat for tonight's live. And then you can also find it on Rooted's Facebook and Rooted's Instagram, and also at Red Birth Green on Instagram as well. There's a link in our bio. If every dollar counts, even if it's like no amount is too small. And we're just really grateful for those opportunities to show up and do that. It's always weird to ask for money too, but that's the reality of nonprofit work. So
It's
here
your
we are.
piece of reclaiming the village. It's your piece of coming back in, and I mean that money is going, like this fundraiser is going specifically directly to providing that community-based birth support for someone.
It is. Yes, it is direct impact. I can say that with certainty. And that is the part that I love about nonprofit work, is that you don't have to look very far to see your money in action. And that is especially the case with the work that we're doing right now with training birth workers and expanding our services and just growing who we are as an entity. So it's very cool, very exciting times. And we're really thrilled to be able to share it with all of you. So yeah, thank you for sticking with us and having this really tough conversation. As always, if you know people who you feel would benefit from it, share it with them. We love being able to further that reach as well. And we invite you back again next week at 8:30 on Thursday night to have another conversation after dark with us. So until then, be good to yourself, be good to others, and we'll see you soon. Have a great week.